So just quickly saying that there will be some commercial examples of photography. Don't be put off by that. You too can do really great photographs, and I hope at the end of the day you pick up a few tips. Now I'm going to go to screen sharing. Okay, as previously said, I'm going to show you some commercial photography that was done by Jackie and I in the 70s and 80s, and then get on to how you can take great photographs too. Often with the gear you've already got. In this particular photograph for Pioneer Electronics, which ended up in an audio-visual magazine, how it was done was there were black Venetians hung up in the background, and I shone a spotlight on it with a blue gel. I always like to do things as cheaply and economically as possible, and the blue gel was cellophane, cost $1. And then there was front lighting, and then the laser disc was turned over to show its rainbow of colours, because you only get a printed label on top, and all this was very new to Australia at the time. And the grid pattern, which you would have seen in other 70s and 80s photos, was a Formica. And of course, you get on a certain angle and it reflects quite well. There's about five flash units there. And there's a more distant view showing you how it was done in the studio where I'm now talking from. And this is photographing car radio for Pioneer. I cut out a section like you would if you were installing it on a dash where it didn't have a cradle or anything. And I cut it out of card, and that made the plane white. A light overhead and mirrors below, and you get all the highlights you need. Pioneer and Philips and other companies liked using my services because of electronics background, and I had power supplies and I could set the gear up. They could hand it to me in the factory and know that everything would be done instead of sending a service department person out. To get the lights on, of course, with a CD player, you have to have it running. So that's what we did. Everyone hearing okay?
Yeah, we're good, thanks, Kevin.
Okay. This, I believe, is the first Pioneer car audio player. And at the time, Pioneer were ordering a monster of prints, 5x7 enlargements, which I decided to make by hand because I'd seen some machines that had streaks on them, and I didn't like the prints with streaks on. One day when Jackie and I were working away in those open baths, like some of you might have done if you ever dabbled in photography, I thought, how many have we done this year? This seems incredible. And it was 20,000 enlargements we'd done that year. And Philips also got all sorts of new products to be photographed. Their design department came up with this interesting modern look room. And then occasionally magazines used the photos. That's in the Pioneer Sound Lounge. Red would be really in awe of the Pioneer Sound Lounge at the time. And even in those days, that system was worth $7,500. The lady was the switchboard operator out front. So I said, oh, it'd look better with a person in. So that we did. About 5 flash units there as spotlights. So just like you're shining spotlights on an item, I chose spotlights to get some real glitter in the chrome and clarity. And here's what radio waves looks like when it's combined just before printing. And the idea that if you photograph something on a shiny surface, if you get on a lowish angle, it reflects, which can be quite attractive. This was on a cover once. It's my transistor radio, identical to the one I had as a kid. And that's like a bench top that you'd have in a kitchen. I used to look around for materials that you could use. And then in Canberra at the Radio Fest, I photographed the speaker, but on auto exposure, it came out too light. So on the right-hand side, you can see that in almost any image adjustment program, you can darken it and set it good. That was also on the cover of Radio Waves, but cut out. If you think it's a bit of a mystery about cutting out images in something like Photoshop, it's not really. Just think of using scissors to cut something out. And in this case, you draw around it, and when you have it perfectly drawn around, you hit delete and away goes the background. Now, I'll refer occasionally to Photoshop, but there are other applications you can use that do the same thing if you choose to. And some of them are even free. My friend Glenn Percy, who's a radio amateur, built this transceiver. He started at Pi Telecommunications when I did, but he always was quite brilliant at construction and soldering. Now, you may see some black cardboard around, and indeed at one spot there's white. And the idea is if you don't show the right color, well, whatever color you show to a radio will be the color it reflects. So if you want totally washed out front panel, which you don't, then you've got to have black around it. And in this case, I left a little bit white so the knob had some style and character showing it was high gloss. And the front panel photographed with a time exposure to get all the dial lights going. So photographing something like that, it'd be done in pitch darkness, the main exposure done, and then while the camera's still on open, you do a time exposure of the readout. That's his circuitry underneath. Again, just plonked onto a piece of white paper. You can get project paper. And the final result. Now this photograph's a bit unique in that it's got a lot of depth to the transceiver. So I photographed it perfectly in focus on the front panel and then perfectly in focus on the rear panel, and then joined them together to get that maximum depth of focus, or which is sometimes called depth of field. This is a very quick look at how old advertisements can be enhanced. In this one, it's very brown with age. So in Photoshop or similar applications, you open up levels, and with the white pointer, you point it at something that should be white, and in a split second, it comes up pure white paper. And then for the next hour, you fiddle around trying to get rid of all the detail problems, including the fact that that's got a bend in it. That's a double page out of probably Women's Weekly, so it's double A4. And that's the final result, which you see from time to time in radio waves. It started its life quite brown and murky like that. Now, professional flash equipment is basically a bank of big capacitors and a flash tube and about 400 volts. And when you click the shutter on the camera, using a low voltage connection to your camera, it fires the big flash units. That's one of my older ones there, and you have what's called soft boxes. They're almost like a parachute material where they're semi-see-through, but they soften and broaden the light. And then you have mono units, which are these little units that go on the stand, exactly the same as the stand that the HRSA uses. And they're called umbrellas, surprise, surprise. And the umbrella may be translucent where it's pure white, but usually they're more like silver or white coating on the inside. and they're built just like a normal rain umbrella. This is the flash head from the front. In the center is what's called a modeling light. That just gives you a preview of how your flashlight will look when it's fired, because it's hard to guess otherwise. So you have this normal 600-watt lamp that gives you a preview. But if it's aimed at something like an umbrella, you only turn it on for a short time, or it's a cooked umbrella. And then the flash tube is that circle around the outside of the light. And then you have a reflector, which is further boosted by an attachment reflector on an angle that you choose, but that's a typical angles. The one on the right is the very latest type of mono flash unit with a modeling light, which is quite different. It's LED. And with the professional units, you can have control over the amount of light that comes out. You don't always want full power. And beside it on the right is a flash meter. The flash meter tells you how much light there is on the subject. You walk up to the subject and fire it. In this case, it's f5.6.7. So it's rather close to f8. Now, before my time, there was Max Dupain. Many of you have probably heard of Max Dupain. He was very famous for his society-type photographs. There's one called, I think it's The Bather at Manly, that's world famous, and it's shown in museums and that. Max always worked in black and white. If you've seen any AWA photos, they were almost certainly taken by him. But he hated colour, but it was getting that way that colour was needed. And you can see why he hated colour, because his spotlights have made everything green. And when that photo of Max's was published in Radio Waves, I gave it a lot of corrections. You can particularly see it in the dials. But one thing I couldn't change easily, I tried and tried, was to make the Bakelite brown again. It looks brown on the left, but believe me, it would come out awful in a printed magazine. So I worked out the colour brown it was out of a swatch of CMY colours and overlaid it and requested in the overlay that it change colour to that, and it worked a treat. There's one of Max's photos. As I said, if you've seen AWA photos, you've seen Max's photos. He also very occasionally took photos for shops and Astor and a few other brands. Now, this photo was taken of an Atwater, Kent display in America in 1927. But the one on the left is how it came out. They got the exposure wrong. So somehow it was preserved. It was a glass negative, and it was preserved for nearly 90 years till Photoshop and Kevin came along, and I was able to get it to the image on the right. As a matter of interest, the models in the scene are actually not human. They're very, very good replicas. And that would have come from an 8 by 10 inch glass plate. Jim Greig took this photo recently, so I helped out by cutting it out. As I said, it's a little bit like cutting with scissors, only you draw around it with your cursor and then delete, and you have the cutout. So if you ever want to get into it a bit more, you can get a graphics application. The cheapest semi-professional one is Adobe Photoshop Elements. You used to be able to buy them to keep for about 120, but Adobe's got into subscriptions, so I'm not sure if they're still around as to keep. If you want indoor lighting, and most of us do, today's a good example, you can do it in all weather and have more control. Costco at the moment has these lamps for just $30 and they're 8,000 lumens. Around the house, very few lights that most people have are more than about 1,000. So incredible value, and I've bought a few and I'm going to try them out. But it's certainly in the shed, they're going to be great. I'll show you in a moment how you can take photos like that, because I took that photo yesterday just out front in the garage, the front of the garage in sunlight. Now, what did it cost to do that? Assuming you've already got a reasonable camera, it cost me nothing for a table, just like Jim Eason brings along. Someone had thrown one out and it was a beauty. Unfortunately, as people retire or worse, some of the rallies come along and just put them out for roadside rubbish. And I said, I'll have that. The white background was $10, which I'll describe in a minute. And the black project paper was $10. Mirrors, which are used to highlight the edges, were $6, a total of $26. And even better, you get to use that for years. Now, there was an assignment given to me by Graham a while back, photograph a fleet of Philips Mallard and Fleetwood portables. I said, no problem, Graham. I've actually got each of those, so I didn't have to even have a delivery of Graham's radios. These are photographed on my kitchen bench. You can see the reflection caused by the bench top. I use studio bounce light, or you can use daylight outside or an artificial light bounce. You can also do bounce light with SLR. And today, even though I've got an SLR, I'm not going to push you to get one because you can do an enormous amount with the camera you've got or a nice little compact. And that's the final result, photographed in my kitchen. In the next section where I talk about photographing an empire, Big Brother, I'll explain how the glow was there and all that sort of thing. Sometimes I'm asked, but please don't ask, it takes a long time, to restore or rescue photos that are contributed. So the one on the left is as supplied to us and the one on the right is after some work. I deliberately left a little bit of shine there to give it character. Now your camera choices, if you're thinking of changing or upgrading, are mobile phones, a point and shoot compact camera, a high zoom all-in-one, or a digital single lens reflex. That's where every time you want to change the magnification, you've got to dismantle the lens off the camera and put another one on. So I use them as little as possible now. Mobile phones are now being offered with 100 megapixels. I once had a full page in an electronics magazine off a 4 megapixel camera. And even the Herald Sun used to use 4 megapixel cameras for their sports and other photography. So the megapixels is not a total indicator of extreme quality. Now you might recognize this from the cover of Radio Waves. Dave Bartlett up in Gippsland took that photo with his iPhone, but he used a normal incandescent lamp which was in the room. He just sat it down and photographed it. And with some adjustments, it's very likely the first iPhone cover photo in Australia. So I enhanced it up, got rid of all the yellow in the picture, which almost made the radio look blue, and gave it a little bit of sharpening and a little bit of perspective correction. the angle you photograph a radio on can often be important. So there's a bit of before and after. I also took a tiny bit of the highlight out, but that was just being a bit fussy. Now, a 100 megapixel camera, including a phone camera, must be better than a 16 megapixel camera, right? No. Other factors are important too, like the quality of those pixels and the lens in front. If you're looking for a camera that, if you haven't got one, you can get a point and shoot camera. They're getting a bit hard to get these days because the mobile phones do the photos pretty well. And that's the sort of photos you can expect from a point and shoot camera. The one on the left was by Michael Justin, and I had his credit written down there. I'll have to fix that gremlin. And the one on the right, I took at another auction pre-shoot and just had bits of card behind. An all-in-one zoom camera is my idea of ideal for radios, travel, and more. Digital SLRs take a little better images due to their lenses, but need lens swapping regularly, can get dusty and dirty underneath, and even one lens can cost as much as an all-in-one zoom lens camera or a lot more. So I'm not mentioning digital SLR here. This is my idea of a favorite camera. I have a Nikon P900, which I think is getting hard to get because it brought out a P950, and the P950 is about 1,200. It's quite easy to shoot and hold one-handed, and the zoom fully extended looks like on the right, but when you're carrying it, it's really drawn into just where the arrow cursor is pointing. And you can have such fun with it and with your travel, with your radios and whatever. The picture of the lifesavers going out to sea at Burleigh Heads was photographed from about 1 kilometre away. And the picture below it at Springvale Radio Fest was taken from the balcony, and Eric Serens, who's looking at his computer there, is where the arrow is, right up on stage. And that was handheld. And of course, you can take pictures of the moon as well, and other great things with zoom. I have a review of that camera, which applies equally to the P950 and the P1000 at that web link. If anyone doesn't note the web link, you can email me and I'll send it over to you. Cheaper ones available as well, like the Panasonic Lumix at $500, still has a very good zoom. Now, photographing, watch for color cast and reflections. Radios and other shiny things see what's in front of them or beside them. And when I was doing the main shot to show you how great you can do just on a sunny day, I forgot my own rule, and the side of the radio was a bit blue there. I did fix it, but certainly you've got to watch color casts like this. My garage door is nicely showing yellow into the sides and tops of the Empire. Here's an extreme color cast. I couldn't believe this. It was on eBay and he described it as a green radio. So I emailed him and said, hang on, mate, it's blue. And he said, no, it's green. So he mustn't have had his camera set right, and a cloudy under shade already is quite blue, and it came out blue when it should have been on the right. The colour on the right, which I later adjusted it to. But you generally don't have to worry about colour cast if you set your camera right to auto daylight. Now, everything's best photographed on a white background. And this is an absolute doozy I use a lot. If you've ever been working for an office, you might see their wall calendar. It's certainly available from Officeworks, and near the expiry date of the calendar, they can be about $10 each. They're on a fairly heavy card, and it's super white on the rear. So as you can see in the bottom picture, I've opened it up and you can just plonk anything you want to photograph on it. The alternative is melamine, which is available from Bunnings. It's available as a shelf material, is the best one because it's quite thick, and you'd put one on the flat ground base and one at the vertical. And they're available in small sizes. Last time I looked, so you don't have to get your saw out. Now, camera settings are important. This is what went wrong with a fellow who had a green radio looking blue. Exposure center weighted. So if you aim at the Empire, then it will expose for the Bakelite color instead of washing out or going dark, whichever the setting was. Focus center weighted, but not spot. Spot's okay though, you can do spot. Mode is best in auto focus and auto exposure. People will tell you that the settings that you have the camera on should be all manually done. It's a load of rubbish. You can take very professional photos, and I do, on autofocus and auto exposure. And it saves you having to squint and maybe occasionally getting focus wrong. The recommended ISO or ASA is 100, and the setting for storage of the images in the camera is JPEG maximum size, minimum compression. Important thing about camera cards is get the fastest and biggest that you can afford, but also suits your camera. Some cameras have a limit on size. I like 32 gig. This one's 128, it's probably a bit much, but beware of fakes. My friend bought a camera card and he was going to use it for video at a very important event, and he thought, I'm going to get a lot of ongoing work from this if I do it right. And the card that he bought from on eBay had the right label on, a very cheap card. So it had been relabeled. Now, here's how to photograph the Empire Big Brother outdoors. All you'll need for the outdoors one would be a table, a background card, which we've covered, a cloudy or sunny day. Now, here's the photo on a sunny day with the arrows pointing a couple of flaws that some of you might not like, which is high reflections. On a cloudy day, in most ways, it's a bit better. Try for around about midday, otherwise it can get in the morning, say about 10 o'clock, it might be a bit cool and too blue. And then about 5:30, 6 o'clock, it might be too yellow as the sun goes down. Now the arrow's pointing to see the reflection on the end of, or the edge of the radio. It's probably not the most desirable to have it so white. And we have an answer for that. You can take photos like this. Now, assuming you've already got a camera, you'll need a table, a white background that we've already described, black project paper for about $10, and 2 mirrors. I recommend the $2 shop acrylic mirrors because you'll never break them easily and have glass everywhere. So the total for this shoot was $26, and you can reuse them again and again. Now here's the setup to achieve that on a sunny day. Now the Empire is a really good example because it looks better with highlights on all its fluting, all its mouldings. And so mirrors are turned around until there's highlights on each of the steps. The light from above, which is sun, did the highlights along there and there. And then I've got a black card here, so that the top of the radio is a nice shade of brown rather than blowing out a lot. And then along the side of the radio, there was a little bit of white showing, so a piece of black card was added there too. Now, I'm just about to close. So the final thing is about macro. Why is macro of interest? Well, you might want to photograph something and then come back to it later on and put it together the way it was. Or you might want to see if there's a dry solder joint and your eyes are not what they used to be, or all sorts of records like that. And with good macro, you can see things far beyond the naked eye. In this case, I think we can see that the LED is bent over and prone to short, and this LED is bent over and definitely shorting. So that was taken on a mobile phone. Most of you have mobile phones that will do it. The thing that brings out even better quality or detail is that some mobile phones also have an app which has adjustments to the image, including cropping, sharpening, density, all that sort of thing. Or you can get something like an iPad Pro and take a similar shot. I hope you can see on the screen this is a little bit better. And then you can enlarge it up and really see things up close if you need to. That'd be really good for dry solder joints. There are some radio Facebook pages, and someone the other day said, I was trying to work out why my radio wasn't working right, and then I finally saw a dry joint. And that's how it all started for me. I'm the person right in the corner left, and we're making pi overland transceivers, which many amateur radio operators later on thought they were gold because they could modify them for their use. Thank you very much for your attention today, and end. Any questions?
Thank you, Kevin. Your any questions was drowned out by the applause. Have we got any questions? Oh, come on. After that, someone's, hang on, I just had someone before.
Kevin, I was just interested in your technique with cuttings with the scissors using a mouse. How do you get the edges so straight, especially if you've got a straight edge with a couple of little ridges or whatever? Can you navigate around that with a mouse successfully, or are there special software techniques?
You can navigate with the mouse successfully. Considering the mouse really draws a straight line, how it's achieved is you enlarge it to a very, very high enlargement, and you can then do extreme accuracy. Like that one there's cut out totally, and then the background added in Photoshop later, which I really didn't cover that well in this talk. But that's not a blue light, that's just a blue a background added and faded out. Does that answer that question? The key is absolutely enlarge it to a huge size.
You can also use GIMP, which is a free software program. GIMP, G-I-M-P. It's pretty clunky, but it does everything that Photoshop does and more, just about.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. You're quite right, of course, and there are other applications. I probably can't use GIMP because, well, A, it's still not quite professional enough, but B, I'm using Macs.
My background was that the masking, sample and masking was probably the simplest if you've got a high definition of your subject and the background. So if your background's white and there's nothing on, you can essentially sample the background and then with the appropriate software, it'll do a pretty damn good mask around the edges for you, and then you just delete or whatever else. So that it doesn't require a high magnification process to define the edges.
It does actually, and I'll explain why. It depends how fussy you are. If you're going to good size reproduction, especially in magazines, there's the magic wand in Photoshop, and there's other wands in different applications. No doubt GIMP's probably got it too, but it's never perfect. You've got to, and you've also got to set the feathering, which is the softness of your line. At times, like if I was doing this photo and it wasn't super fussy, yes, I'd apply the magic wand and see what it'd do for me.
Anyone else? Yep.
Yeah, hi, I'm David. I've got a little bit of background in IT, so I know a little bit about the software that you use to edit photos and so forth. I just wanted to make a general comment about those JPEG files when you're editing them. Every time you do an edit or a change and save it, it loses a little bit of quality. So you've got to be careful not to do too many changes and save it over and over again, because otherwise your resolution goes down really badly.
Yes, David, thank you for that. I actually save in Photoshop when I'm still in progress because it doesn't lose anything. Just off the cuff, I would think you could save as a TIFF too, a lossless TIFF, and there are other ones as well, but I always save in Photoshop when in progress.
Anyone else? Okay, we're all signed. Look, thank you very much for that, Kevin. You covered a fair bit of info. I don't know, maybe we could do a follow-up sometime, or maybe question and answer or something. But look, thank you very much. And the IT worked just fine, and we should do this again sometime.
Yes, thank you, Ian. I can finally do a small article for Radio Waves if you wish to.
Oh, yes, please. Picture Perfect Part 2.
Yes.
Okay. Look, thank you again, Kevin. Did we give him enough applause before? No, come on. Okay, Graham, what's next? Afternoon tea. Thanks, folks. Thank you, Kevin. We're going to have afternoon tea. You'll have to self-serve.
Thank you for your efforts, Ian. It sounded like it was going well.